Hello, welcome to this analysis of Hans Christian Andersen's story, The Snow Queen. If you haven't read it yet, you can stop listening to this video and do so. If you want to listen to it, I have a recording that I did. It takes a little bit over an hour. If you don't want to listen to my voice read it, then I'm sure that there are other people who have done it a lot better job. But you probably need to know what the story is before you listen to my take on what it's about and all that stuff. The reason I picked it was just because I like it. I had read it as a kid. There was a beautiful edition with great illustrations that I really enjoyed. I think it was abridged, probably, but as I read it as an adult, it's just has a lot to think about. And there's anybody can think different things about it. They can approach it in completely different ways. I was reading about what other people thought about it. One guy wrote a whole paper about how it bridges this uh, sense of reality. So he defines them into the uncanny, which it's a place where things are a little bit weird, but they probably have a rational reason behind them, and we just don't know it. And then there's the fantastical, which maybe things are really weird and different, or maybe not, and we can't tell. And then there's the marvelous, which is where most fairy tales live in. It's just clearly not reality. And he argues that at least for a while, this story, The Snow Queen, takes place in that in between state where we're not sure if it's real or not. And never would have occurred to me to think about it that way, but he might have a point. I was reading it though. I was thinking about the symbolism and all of the details and what they might mean. Things like the shoes. She has red shoes. Why? Why are they red? Why pick the shoes? And then I was thinking, well, shoes, they they're like they're what you wear to go on a journey. So that's why they're at the beginning. But why are they red? I don't know. Why is there a crow? Why is he the one that tells the story? Why isn't it a jackdaw or a raven? Why was there the Lapland woman and the Finnish woman? What is it that the Lapland woman provides to the story? Why do we need her? I don't know. Um, there's these details that you can think about, and you can just bark up those trees and um, see if there's a good answer. And if you don't have an answer, you can make one up. I think there's a lot of good human observations. I think they're really on point. So the story starts with a mirror. It's an amazing metaphor for evil and showing how good people can be corrupted. So the shard goes into Kay's eye, right? And it skews his perception of the world, the way he views it, literally in the eyeball. And then he becomes a pessimist and he only sees the flaws in things. He only sees the flaw in the flowers and the roses, and he compares it to the snowflake and how perfect it is. He's physically unable to look past imperfection and recognize beauty in things. He's smart. In fact, that's all he has. It's just his intelligence, but it's not good enough, and it's not as good as kindness. And he finds that he isn't smart enough. He's not smart enough to solve the puzzle at the end. And it's not as good as being kind, is kind of the point of the story, this intelligence. So, my other points. Another good observation about human behavior, oddly enough, does not come from a human. It comes from the reindeer, who always tells his own story first because that's what he thinks is important. Uh, that doesn't really contribute a ton to the story, like the overall arch, but that is absolutely true. That's how we act. We're always the center of the story, and even though something else much more interesting is going on, no, we think we're the ones. We're in the middle of it. Gerda begins her journey because she's so proud of her new shoes and she wants to show Kay. And that's the excuse that she tells herself in her mind. Okay, that's why I'm going on the journey, but that isn't the reason. And you can tell that because she gets rid of the shoes almost immediately. So that sense of self-delusion, that's something that people do all of the time. We make up stories to ourselves about why we're doing things, why we want to do things, and that's not really what it is. And you can see what the truth is by the way we behave. And then there's the woman who can conjure or conjure. I don't ever know where to put the stress on that word. I apologize. She's not evil. It's very clear in the story. She's not evil, but she is selfish. And that serves evil's purpose, doesn't it? Um, the result is the exact same. And that's an apt observation as well. You don't have to be malicious to be a bad person. And that's something to be really careful about. Um, another good human observation is that Gerda hears this story from the crow about the prince and the princess, and she hears about how smart the prince is. This is very thin evidence. And she says, oh, that must be Kay. Because that's what she wants to believe. That's what we do. That's what people do. We believe what we want to believe based on not very much evidence at all. There's a lot more in there, but those are the ones that I thought were most important. Good to talk about. So then there's the symbolism. And one of the most important things I think in that is the gender flipping that Andersen did. Older fairy tales do have female protagonists, okay? You've got Snow White, you've got Cinderella, you've got Sleeping Beauty, Rapunzel. But some people would argue that these female protagonists are actually the prize. And it's not really about them, it's about the prince, the knight who goes and saves them. That's not the whole story, though. There are still fairy tales with female protagonists, like Rumpelstiltskin, or there's one called Molly Whoopie that you might not have heard of. These are stories where there is definitely a female protagonist who has to go on a quest and beat the bad guys using her own agency, usually cleverness. And they work. I mean, they've been out there, but they're not very common. It's much more common to see a young boy or a young knight or somebody like that going out and doing the quest. So Andersen isn't doing something entirely new, but he does do something that's a little bit more unusual for a fairy tale. And the Snow Queen is not the only one that he did this on. He also did Thumbelina before the Snow Queen. He did The Little Mermaid. So um, he's thinking about that. But in the Snow Queen, he does it even more than just the protagonist, right? He's got the prince and the princess, which is a Cinderella situation that's flipped. And in the original tale, it's this prince who decides that he's going to have to find a princess who's good enough. And in this one, it's the princess who's the high and mighty one, and she's got to find a guy who is interesting to talk to. There's the robber queen. You would expect a robber king. No, the violent antisocial person here is robber queen with her rather unpleasant robber daughter. You've got like the Lapland woman and the Finnish woman. They serve as kind of these wise old hermits that are usually male, but this time they're female. So there's a lot of gender flipping. That's something to think about. Why did he do that? Now there is a big exception to this gender flip. The conjuring woman, who represents an obstruction from the quest. This is a role that This is a step in the quest that's pretty common in epic quest stories like um, the Odyssey or the Aeneid. I don't know how to say that one either. Um, so in the Odyssey, Odysseus stops on this island with Circe, and you've got this situation where it's probably best for him if he stops because he's offered a life of comfort. He can get off of the quest and be done. And so it's a distraction, but we don't need him to do that. We, the readers, we need him to go on the quest so that a story can be told, you know. And inside the story, he needs to be the hero, and he needs to go and rescue. He needs to rescue Ithaca. He needs to return to Penelope. The same thing happens in the Aeneid with Dido, and that story was actually written by Virgil. That was a contemporary request to Mark Antony. Leave Cleopatra. Rome needs you. You're on a quest. Come back to us. And Mark Antony did not, and he died. The thing is, the Conjuring Woman in The Snow Queen fills this same role, distracting the hero from the quest. But if we did a one-for-one gender flip, it would kind of complicate things because with these mature male protagonists, a sexual relationship is either implicit and often explicit. Doesn't work with this little girl, especially because her superpower is innocence. So Andersen was pretty smart about not just doing a top-down one-for-one gender flip on everything. He's like, let's keep this one. Um, let's keep this female with the female protagonist, but we're going to change her to a matronly distraction instead of a sexual one, which I think was a pretty smart move. So this is a good place to pull back and look at what the Snow Queen is about. We have the good human observations. What's the theme? What was Hans Christian Andersen trying to say? What did he say? And are those two different things? So on the face, it's about the power of compassion and innocence, or the triumph of warm love over cold perfection. It's vibrant life over of the rose, you know, over the static death of a snowflake. Gerda doesn't have to do much. She just has to go. She just has to go on the quest. And she has to tell her story. And all kinds of people who shouldn't care about her and about her story, they do. Because she is so earnest. She melts the hearts of the prince and princess. And they say, oh, well, you know, you shouldn't have snuck in here. And we will put up measures to see that nobody ever does it again, but we're still going to help you out. And she melts the heart of the robber girl, who does not have any reason whatsoever to be kind to Gerda, but she gets on board and she lets her escape with her beloved reindeer that she loves to torture. She reads all of them with compassion, right? Her perspective, and even not her perspective, Kay's perspective is restored by her empathy, literally. She cries and her tears wash out the shard that is in his eye. The only thing is, she has to remain ignorant of her superpower, because if she knows that she has this effect on people, then she can either use it intentionally, and that's manipulation, or she will think, you know, probably more likely, she'll go, oh, I don't want to manipulate people, so I'm just not going to tell my story anymore. So her power is in compassion and innocence, and that's what the story is about, which is pretty cool. But is it true? Is does compassion and innocence, or are they really that powerful? Um, and is the messaging true? I can think of a lot of ways how the messaging of this story could be interpreted by or as reinforcing gender roles, even though it was intentionally gender flipped, because it says, oh, if it was a male protagonist, it would be he would win because he was so strong and bold and clever and stuff. But we're relying on these female traits of compassion and innocence, and we don't want to put women in that box, and that's just terrible. Um, so yeah, good job, Anderson, for being progressive in 1844, but it doesn't really match our views right now, so we're going to cancel you, and we're just not going to teach it. We're going to pretend like you don't exist. But to me, if you flip the genders in the gender flip tale, and if you had a boy going after a girl, or a girl going after a girl, or a boy trying to rescue a boy, it can still be platonic, and it can still be solid. Compassion and innocence are still valuable traits to have. Those are good virtues. So um, I don't really see a problem with this story. I think it's a really good story when you take it at its face. So I'm going to take the controversial position and say the overt messaging in the tale is good, and I want my kids to be like Gerda, and I want to be more like Gerda. But that's not all. We can take this story in context with Andersen as a person and what was his intent, and that could possibly change things, couldn't it? So we know that Andersen was inspired by opera singer Jenny Lind. He wrote a story called The Nightingale that was very clearly about her, because she was called the Swedish Nightingale. And he even, I think he says as much in his autobiography that she was the inspiration for that story. There's been an allegation. Okay, sorry, back up. He he had a crush on her, and he even proposed marriage to her, but she thought that their friendship was more platonic, and so she turned him down. So there's been the allegation that um, he wrote the Snow Queen saying that Lind was like the Snow Queen with her icy heart, and she was keeping him prisoner against his will, in this metaphorical ice palace. And when you look at the details of some of the literary, or not literary, artistic criticism that Lind had at the time, that she was technically pretty good, but as a singer, but she didn't lack, or she lacked the soul, she lacked the passion to really do Italian opera. So technically good, but not the life that they were looking for. You can kind of go, oh yeah, I can see that. So that would turn this story into something else entirely, wouldn't it? It's now it looks kind of petty, honestly. And it also kind of looks pathetic to say you feel jilted about this, and so now you're going to write the person that you were offended by in as a villain and write yourself as the victim, and you're just looking for somebody else to come and rescue you with their innocence and compassion. Yeah, I'm not into that. So that casts a shadow on the whole thing. But then here's another twist. That allegation comes from Carol Rosen in 2004. And that means that there's been 160 years between 1844 and 2004. And Rosen, she's the one who figured this out. We didn't know anything else about this until we didn't know this detail about this story until now. Um, that's a pretty bold take, especially when you take it into account that Andersen's own autobiography was written after he wrote The Snow Queen, and everything he has to say about Jenny Lind is positive. He doesn't sound like a jilted lover at all. So, does that mean that we are projecting a story onto this that serves our modern needs that wasn't even real? So, that is something to think about when you were thinking about literature and thinking about what things mean. What kind of baggage are you pulling into this story? And does that redeem the Snow Queen? Does that make it great? I say when you have the choice of thinking about something that is and you could think about it as ugly or stupid, or you could choose to believe that it was beautiful and good. Um, yeah, don't let the devil's mirror get stuck in your eye. Go ahead and call it good. Let's call it awesome. I want to end this video, or not video. I mean, technically it's a video, but you only see the icon. I want to end this by looking at the influences that the Snow Queen had over literature and art coming after it. So, one of the things we talked about at the beginning, the female protagonists, they became a lot more popular after the Snow Queen. Like I mentioned that they were rare before, but they start coming out a lot more often later. And I don't know if they were influenced by Andersen because, like I said, Snow Queen wasn't the only one, but he had the others. And I don't know if he was the one who showed them the way, or if he was just the first person to jump into the zeitgeist with that. And it could be either way. I think it is important to mention that Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1792. That was quite a bit before Andersen wrote The Snow Queen. So people were thinking about this. They were thinking about gender and what women could do and what they couldn't do and gender roles and that kind of thing. So that's kind of putting the thumb on he was early on in the zeitgeist. You look at the adult literature that was coming out at that time and a little bit afterwards with the Bronte sisters, with Mary Shelley, with George Eliot, whose real name was Marianne Cross. Yeah, women start to write a lot more, and women start to be written about a lot more. So that's kind of where Andersen is situated. And then if you flip back to the children's literature, Lewis Carroll was also doing his thing with the Alice stories. And then later on, all of that was in the mid 1800s. Then you've got at the beginning of the 1900s, you have The Wizard of Oz. And I think it's kind of interesting, fun to think about how Dorothy's shoes in the book are silver, but in the 1939 film, they are red. There's those red shoes again. So I don't know if that was on accident or I think it was on accident because they were doing the shoes for the color to make it pop, to show off that new technology. But it's still kind of a cool coincidence. Then you got C.S. Lewis. He was clearly inspired by the Snow Queen when he wrote The White Witch for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I mean, it was not even subtle. C.S. Lewis was not very subtle with his fiction at all. I'm sorry. Not like his contemporary at all. And then there's another one, a lot more recent. It's a children's book by Julie Fogliano, and illustrated by Aaron Stead about. It's called If You Want to See a Whale, and it's about if you want to see a whale, you've got to pay attention. And one of the stanzas in it is about roses. And if you want to see a whale, you can't look at the roses because roses don't want you waiting for or wondering about things that are not sweet and things that are not pink and things that are not roses. So that's not only the same, roses, although it's a little bit different because in the Snow Queen, it was the roses that serve to motivate. And in this one, it's the roses that are holding you back from your goal. But it's right there in the same theme. And I asked Julie Fogliano if she was inspired by Andersen and the Snow Queen or not, and I didn't get an answer. So, whether I mean that's still it's still something to think about. She could have been unconsciously prompted by the Snow Queen, or maybe that's just a universal truth that flowers like you thinking about flowers, and um, Julie Fogliano stumbled on the same idea that Andersen did independently. And then, of course, we've got Frozen that Disney did. It's pretty clear that uh, Frozen is a lot, even more so than the other inspirations that they've used, disconnected from the Snow Queen. They're not very similar at all, but you can still see a lot of the callbacks. Some of them big, some of them small. There's the talking, quote unquote, talking reindeer. There's the sauna. There's the ice golem, which is a lot like the snow demons that Gerda encounters as she's about to close in on the Snow Queen's ice palace. And of course, there's the explicitly emphasis on love, platonic love, over non-sexual love, and the redemption arc. So the Snow Queen lives on. All right, thanks for hanging with me. I hope that wasn't too boring, and I'll see you guys later.